Go ahead, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I approach the witness again?
Yes.
There was one item out of 317 I believe I didn't give to you. Exhibit number 681.
That is 317, F.
That's also one of the photographs that you took?
Yes.
Mr. Nicola, can you make sure the microphone's on? Now it's on. Thanks.
You mentioned that you used an ALS light source, alternate light source.
Uh-huh.
On the magazines looking for biological fluids during the break. Is there a reason for doing that prior to checking for latent fingerprints?
Yes, we wanted to preserve any, if there was any DNA evidence, and some of the processing for fingerprints could possibly damage or destroy any DNA evidence. So if you want to search for DNA, you search for that first prior to doing any processing for fingerprints.
Do you do any DNA testing at the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Lab?
No, we send that off to the Department of Justice.
Okay. Regarding the items that you did not put in the evidence bag that you've described earlier, what did you do with the rest of the items that came out of the briefcase, 317?
The items that I did not separate went back into the briefcase. I sealed the briefcase and sent it back to the Santa Barbara Sheriff's property room.
And at the time you placed the remaining items back into the briefcase, were they now marked with the numbers and letters that you had assigned each of the magazines or pieces of papers?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall when you began your examination of item 317, the black briefcase?
I started my examination on January 20, 04.
How long did it take you to completely photo document and number what was in there?
I completed the entire task when I delivered them to the Department of Justice on the 5th of February 04.
Okay. So it took you approximately a week and a half?
Couple weeks. Yeah.
Okay. While you were processing each of the items that were in 317, and then you had to go home at night, what would you do with all the evidence?
I'd place them therein. All evidence that I took out of the property room goes into our secure lab. The only personnel that has keys are the 3 people that work in our unit. And then I place them in my cupboard which is assigned to me and place a piece of evidence tape over the top of the door so I know that I was the one who sealed them in there. In the morning, the seal was still complete, so I would know that no one has ever looked at them between when I left them that evening and came back the next morning.
And you kept this going for a couple of weeks until your task was complete?
Yes.
What did you do with it's going around? What did you do with the briefcase, item 317, when you finished putting the material that you were not going to send to the Department of Justice back into?
It went back to the property room at the Santa Barbara office.
Did you place any kind of seal on it?
Yes.
Is that the one that you pointed out for the jury earlier?
Yes.
And again, what are your initials on that seal?
It will be LSRH 2696. 2696 is my assigned body number by the Sheriff's Department. My ID number.
Did you also process item 321?
Yes.
And are those pictures in front of you?
Yes. Would you like me to read?
I think there's only a few of them.
There's 7, I believe.
Could you tell us the exhibit number?
Yes.
And confirm with the item number whether you took the picture?
Okay. It's exhibit number 682, item number 321A. Exhibit number 683, item number 321B. 684, 321C. 685, 321D. 686, 321E. 687, 321F. 688, 321G.
Could you please take a look at the photograph depicted in Exhibit 685?
Okay.
That's item 321D?
Yes.
And what is that magazine, please?
It's called Hawk, and it was published in February 2003.
And do you recall the date that you processed that particular magazine?
Not without going back to looking at the file in the forensic computer as far as the date I filed them.
And the pictures?
In the pictures, yeah. Or the original placard that would have been my first picture.
Could you give us a time frame?
It was between January 20, 04 and the 5th of February 04.
Okay. And exhibit number 687, please?
This is a Finally Legal magazine published in February 2003.
That was tough. Okay. 321D, exhibit 557. For the record, would you please open up that binder? Is that the magazine that you marked 321D?
Yes. I placed the numbers on the back lower corner unless that cover was black, and then I would put the number on the inside of the back cover.
Okay. The page numbers on the sleeves were placed there, I assume, afterwards?
By someone else. Yes.
Would you please place that back into its exhibit bag? Can you reach the next bag or did I? Thank you. Is that exhibit 687?
No. This one is exhibit 559.
I understand what I did. The picture is 687, right? Okay. Exhibit 559 is which?
It's item number 321F.
Okay. Would you open that up, please? Is that the same magazine you photographed between January 20 and February 5?
Yes.
Of 2004? Okay. Does that also have your markings on it?
Yes, on the back corner. Right down here.
Would you mind putting those items back in their bags, please? Would you please tell us which other magazines you processed?
The next item was 363, and I'm missing A. But do you want me to read the list?
Just tell us what the exhibit is.
Okay, the exhibit number is 689, 363B, 690, 363C, 691, 363D, 692, 363E, 693, 363F, 694, 363G, 695, 363H, 696, 363I, 697, 363J, 698, 363K, 699, 363L.
And you processed all those magazines?
Yes.
I'd like you to take a look, please, at Exhibit 518. Do you recognize the contents of 518?
Yes.
What is that?
This is 317R. It's a magazine, a barely legal hardcore, published by Hustler that I examined during the time I was there.
Between February 20th, January 20th.
January 20th and February 5th.
Of last year?
Of last year.
Okay. Do you see any of the post-it notes that you have placed on that magazine initially when you had sent it to DOJ still on there?
Yes, there's one actually on the first page.
May she publish to the jury, Your Honor?
Just, the way we do that is.
Do you want me to do it up here?
Yeah, use the.
I'm going to object if it's publishing hearsay, for the truth of the matter. I don't know what's being shown.
Show counsel.
That's not the receipt?
No.
Okay, that's fine.
This is a.
It's a yellow post-it note that I placed there to direct DOJ to examine this page especially, because I felt that there was something on this page that fluoresced and could possibly have DNA evidence on it.
Okay. Did you notice other pages of post-it notes on there?
Yes.
Mr. Sanger?
That's fine.
You should state the exhibit number when you show it.
This is all of 317R.
The individual pages aren't separately marked.
Page number 3?
Yes.
And there's the page number. Did you process any of these items after they came back from the Department of Justice any further?
No.
Okay. If you could please identify for the record the remainder of those photographic exhibits if you do recognize them.
Okay. This first picture was not taken by me.
Okay. That's 363M?
And it's exhibit number 700.
Okay. Is that 363M?
It's 363M.
Okay.
And exhibit number 701, 363N, as in, Nora. 3. Exhibit number 702, 363O. Exhibit number 703, 363P. 704, 363Q. 705, 363R. 706, 363s. 707, 363t. 708, 363u. 709, 363v.
Again, she's testifying that she took those pictures?
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor. Okay. I have no further questions, Judge.
Cross-examine?
Hi.
Hi.
What is your exact title with the Sheriff's Department?
I'm a senior identification technician.
So you're in the forensic
Yes.
lab?
Yes.
And what kind of duties do you have in general?
My basic duties are crime scene investigation, latent print searches, latent print comparisons, shoe print comparisons. I run the Cal ID section. I process evidence. I photodocument victims or suspects. I collect evidence.
Okay. Do you do any other kinds of forensic or scientific tests on evidence?
We collect what we think is possible evidence, like body fluids, like blood at a crime scene. Stuff like that could be possibly blood, and then it is sent to the Department of Justice for testing.
Okay. Now, the Department of Justice, we're talking about the California Department of Justice?
Yes.
Is that correct? That's a state agency?
Yes.
It's not the United States Department of Justice?
No, it's California.
And the California Department of Justice has regional labs, is that correct?
Yes.
And they have one in Goleta?
Yes.
And so when you said you hand-delivered something to the lab, does that mean you went over to Goleta?
Yes, I just deliver it to the Goleta lab.
And your office is located in Santa Maria, or is it in Santa Barbara?
Santa Barbara.
So you basically came across the freeway and took it to the people there?
Yes.
Alright. The Department of Justice Lab is their Department of Law Enforcement Bureau of Criminalistics, right?
Yes.
So they're a lab that's set up to assist law enforcement, like yourself, in doing criminal investigations. Is that right?
Yes.
Alright. Now, besides, you mentioned you're a latent print examiner?
Yes.
Is that correct? And did you participate in fingerprint examinations in this case?
Yes, I did.
And did you do comparisons?
Yes.
Alright. When you were out at the ranch, you said you were at the search at Neverland Ranch on November 18, 2003. Is that correct, to start with?
Yes.
And your job was to do what again?
I was to photodocument any evidence seized during. I was assigned to a search team, and any time they found a piece of evidence that they wanted to seize, I photographed it before it was seized.
And what location were you in?
I was in the arcade cellar and then the office that's adjoined in the security building.
Okay, Mr. Jackson's office?
Yes.
And it's, sometimes people called it a museum as well?
Yeah, a museum, office.
A lot of artifacts?
A lot of memorabilia.
Did you go into Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
No.
Therefore you didn't photodocument anything in the main residence, is that correct?
No.
As far as seizing evidence, did you actually seize, touch, package evidence, or just photograph it?
Just photograph it.
Now, you were aware that your unit, the forensics unit at the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department, was going to be involved in some follow-ups based on the evidence that was seized at Neverland, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you go to the briefing that was held before the officers went to Neverland?
Yes.
And when was that briefing?
That briefing was in I think it's the Veterans Hall that's adjoined in Solvang.
Okay, was that the day before?
No.
When was it?
It was at 6 a.m. the morning of the search.
Okay, the actual morning of the search. And at that time you were given a description by Sergeant Roble and others of the general nature of the investigation. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you know what kind of investigation it was?
Yes.
What kind of case? You also were given the names of some of the possible individuals involved in the case. Is that correct?
Yes.
Given the name, for instance, of Gavin Arvizo and Star Arvizo?
Yes.
And you were aware that Mr. Michael Jackson, my client, was the focus of this investigation. Is that correct?
Yes.
In fact, at that time you were advised that the sheriff's department had already obtained an arrest warrant for Mr. Jackson. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Alright, so when you went out there to the scene, approximately how many officers went out to the scene, to the Neverland Ranch, with you?
I'm not quite sure. Probably 50.
Okay, however many it was, this was a big operation, right?
Yes.
Alright, and you understood the need to be careful with the evidence and so on?
Yes.
In any case, you want to be careful of evidence, right?
Yes, you always wear gloves and you bag it.
In this particular case, after you got through photo documenting evidence at the scene at Neverland, did you return to the sheriff's department?
Yes, I did.
That very day?
Yes, that evening.
That night, what did you do with at the sheriff's department?
We secured anything that we had in our forensics vehicle as far as equipment. We didn't have any evidence with us. And we went home for the night. It was a long day.
Alright, sounds like a good idea at the time. The point being that when you went back to the sheriff's department, you had equipment. You had what you started out with?
Yes.
But you didn't come back. You, in your unit, did not come back with any evidence?
No.
So the other deputy sheriffs and detectives had custody of whatever evidence you had seen and photo documented at the time. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
When was the next time that you actually saw any evidence in this case?
I'm not quite sure. I was never assigned to work on any evidence until January 20th. But other people in our unit were assigned to conduct searches or photo document things, and in passing, I could have seen some evidence and...
Okay. Did you? Okay. So you could have seen somebody have something on their desk at the lab or somewhere?
Well, inside our lab. That's where we kept most of our evidence.
But you were not assigned to do anything with it, is that correct?
No.
So you didn't do anything?
I was not assigned to do any work on it until January 20th.
Alright, so just to, other than a passing glance or some casual look at something, you didn't have any formal contact with any evidence in this case until January 20th of 2004. Is that correct?
Yes. The only evidence would be photographs, detectives requesting photographs that were taken at the scene, or prior, or during the investigation. I may have printed them out or downloaded them onto a CD.
Okay, Your Honor, what I'd like to do is ask that an exhibit be marked next in order, and we had a gap. We could use that gap, or whatever the clerk wants to do.
That would be 5005.
Okay, thank you. And what I'd like to do, with the court's permission, is first of all approach the witness and hand this to the witness.
All right.
I placed before the witness, with the court's permission, Exhibit 5005. And what I'd like to do is put a blank copy, it's just a timeline, up on the screen so we can follow along, if there's no objection.
All right.
Oops, you know what? I have the wrong timeline. That will happen. Sorry. We can leave 5005 marked, because I will use it with another witness. Ask that we have this marked as 5006.
Okay.
It's that one. Sorry. Okay, thank you. May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to trade you exhibits there, and give you 5006, and we'll save 5005 for another witness. Alright, does that make sense to you? It's a timeline. Do you have your?
Yes.
Okay, if you look at the board, I have a blank version up there going through February, March, April. Actually, it's a little cut off, but it starts with January of 2003 and goes through 2004. The first thing I'd like you to do is, on your copy which is the actual exhibit, this is just up on the board as a blank. I'd like you to put your name up there where it says, witness, if you would, please.
Do you have a pen?
Do I have a pen? Yes, I do. May I approach?
Yes.
Thank you. Alright, and do I understand that your first contact with the evidence was in November, on November 18th of 2003?
Yes.
And so that would be right about there somewhere, is that correct?
Yeah, yes.
Could you please make a notation there, however you want to do it? Just a line, and above it maybe say, search, or, first contact. Whatever you'd like, and then tell me what you wrote.
Search.
Okay. The next formal contact you had with the evidence was then in January of 2004. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, could you make a notation there? And how would you describe that contact? That's when you were assigned to do the ALS.
The visual search.
Okay. Alright. Now, in between November the 18th and January, when you checked the evidence out that you told us about, did you determine that anybody else had broken the seal on the bag, or, say, broken the seal? Had, for instance, cut another side open to open it up and look at it?
The first time I saw that evidence was January, so between November and January, I wouldn't know, because the first time I ever saw it was January 20th.
I see. So you can't tell us whether or not somebody else checked the evidence out in between to inspect it, or look at it, or do something with it.
There should be the original seals. You never take another person's seal off an evidence item number. So whoever's opened that briefcase will have their seal on the briefcase, and so you can, and, so.
Alright, you're saying, briefcase, and you're looking somewhere. Is it right down there?
Yeah, it's the briefcase.
It's underneath the table?
But in the evidence bag. Every time you open the evidence bag, you got to open it an original way. You can't open up someone else's seal. So you cut it down the sides, on the bottom. You got to be creative when it gets opened multiple times, but there's always a new seal every time you open it and close it back up.
You start out with a bag, has no seals on it. Whoever puts it in first, puts a seal on it, right?
Yes.
And then the next person to open the bag would cut the side or the bottom or someplace where there's otherwise not an opening?
Yes.
Right? And then when they're through, if they do it right, they'll seal it up and put their initials and date on it, right?
Yes.
They should document all this in reports, is that correct?
Yes.
So my question was, based on your observations, if you can remember, and we can take Exhibit 470, which is the briefcase, Sheriff's Item 317.
Yeah.
Okay, and you looked at that for the first time. The first time ever you looked at that was January of 2004, correct?
Yes.
January 20th?
Yes.
Alright, when you looked at it, my question was, and perhaps I wasn't clear. When you looked at it on January 20th, 2004, did you determine that more than one person had sealed the bag up?
I would have to look at my original. I also photographed it prior to opening it, so I would have to look at my photograph to determine that.
Is that possible? Would that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
Do you have it here where you can look at it? It's one of the exhibits?
I don't have it with me, no.
Okay, alright, so for the purposes of the jury, or anybody else that wants to look at it, we could look at the bag, and presumably there would be some other seal on there if somebody else looked at it in between.
Right.
Alright, now, when you opened, let me withdraw that. As you sit here today, then, you cannot tell us whether or not anybody did anything with that evidence between seizure on November 18th and January 20th of 2004, correct?
No.
Okay, at the time that you inspected the contents of Exhibit 470, which is Item 317.
Yeah.
You opened the bag, right?
It was not in the bag at the time. It was just a briefcase with the seals over the locks.
I see. Okay, so you would have to look at the seals on the locks on that, not on the bag?
Yes.
Okay, well, then we have the briefcase.
But there's probably been multiple ones after me, maybe. I don't know.
Let's start with 470. Is it under the table here someplace?
It's right in front, Mr. Sanger.
May I approach and retrieve it?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to just hand you 470 and go back to where I was. I'd ask you to inspect that.
Okay.
And see if, by looking at the whole thing, you can tell what happened between November 18th and January 20th of 2004.
Okay, this would be the last seal on it, and this was the 3rd of December 04, because it's the last one on the outside. Let me work down.
So while you're doing that, in other words, the bag doesn't help you answer the question.
No.
Because that's a later edition.
There's a seal from 11, and unfortunately, it's 1103, and it's after the initial ones, and I can't quite tell whose it is. There's one on January 14, 04. And then there's one on mine, which I sealed up on January 26, 04. And then the one, oops, sorry. And then the top one, November 26, 03.
And so the first seal.
The first seal is the yellow one that's underneath all the red ones.
So you would, based on your experience, you would say that the yellow seal represents
the original seal.
The sealing on November 18, 2003?
Yes.
And then you see at least one seal from later in November of 2003. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that implies, or suggests to you, based on your training and experience, that somebody broke the yellow seal, opened the briefcase.
Yes.
And then resealed it?
Resealed it.
And how many other, or were there any others between then?
Yes, there's one other. January 14, 04.
Okay, so on the 14th of January, 2004, somebody else apparently did the same thing, which was at least open the briefcase and then reseal it.
Yes.
And you don't know what any of those people did with the contents of the briefcase during those two incidents in between the original seizure and January 20th?
No.
Looking at your seal on there, does that refresh your recollection when you concluded working with that evidence?
Yes, I sealed it back up on January 26, 04.
So you had the evidence for about a week, is that correct?
Yes.
Took it out on 1 to 20, opened it up, did the things we'll talk about, which we'll go into in a moment, and then you resealed it on the 26th.
Yes.
So you delivered it to the Department of Justice Crime Lab across the freeway, you said, on February
5th.
5th. But it was already sealed for a week or so by the time you delivered it, right?
Yes. Well, this would have gone back to the property room. The separated items were kept in our secure lab behind my cupboard until I finished processing all the other items in there.
And then you went back to the property room and checked that out? No?
No, this did not go to the Department of Justice.
Oh, that did not go to the Department of Justice. Okay, so the other items, I'm sorry, the other items you took out went to the Department of Justice?
Yes.
And this, on the 26th, then, this just
got returned to the property room.
This was returned to your property room in the sheriff's department?
Yes.
Okay, good. So now, having refreshed your recollection with all that, as far as item 317 of the sheriff's department, exhibit 470, it took you about a week to go through all the evidence in there and photograph it and number the back of each item. Is that correct?
Yes. Along with this, I did this during that week, and then the other items after that.
Okay, so your answer was correct?
Yeah.
To the question that I asked?
Yeah.
You took about a week to go through this particular item, 470, exhibit 470, item 317, right?
Yes.
And during the time that you went through there, what kind of a test did you do? This is when you did your alternate light source?
Well, I first opened it up, noticed that there was numerous items inside the briefcase. And I like to assign them a letter, and we discussed it with the other people processing other evidence that we would assign it a letter so it would be a reference number for us so we could identify each piece individually in that item number. I went through from top to bottom, labeled them all with 317A, on through FFF, I believe. And then took each piece, photographed it, and then examined it under white light and then under the alternate light source, using goggles, and searching each page by page.
Alright, so when you got through doing that, you put it back in the briefcase. Did you put it back in the same order?
Yes.
You didn't shuffle it up?
I did not shuffle it up.
Okay, so, you put it. Do you remember which magazine was on top?
Not offhand. I think it was a loose piece of paper or something, yeah.
Okay, in any event, whatever it was, you put it back in the same order, and then you sealed it, right? Sealed the actual.
I wouldn't seal the briefcase. I sealed my cupboard, because it was open so I could examine each piece. We would have a bazillion.
Alright, thank you.
So I
may not be communicating well.
When I finished with it for the day, I would place it, with the seal broken, inside the cabinet, and then I'd place a seal over my cabinet door.
Alright, I understood that. So what I was asking, though, is when you were through at the end of the week's time on the 26th, you then resealed, put your own tape on the briefcase itself?
Yes.
And took that back to the sheriff's booking, is that correct?
The property room, yes.
Or, sorry, the property room where you booked the evidence in, right?
Yes.
So could you indicate, January 26th, on your timeline there, returned, wherever you want to put it there in January 2004, and that's when you returned the item to the sheriff's evidence room?
Yes.
Okay, Your Honor, I believe Exhibit 86 was already received into evidence. And I would like to put that on up the board for the purpose of asking questions.
On March 7th.
Yes, it was.
May I do that?
Yes.
Thank you. This is Exhibit 86. Do you recognize the subject matter in Exhibit 86 that's in evidence?
Yes.
Does that appear to be the contents of the briefcase?
Yes.
Is that the way it looked when you opened the briefcase the first time on January the 20th of 2004?
Well, I can't say the order, because it's been a long time, but there was loose papers and things up in the top area where there's a divider, and then there was papers and magazines in the entire briefcase, yes.
And you remember there being some loose pages?
Yes.
Of the magazines on top of the actual stack of magazines in the briefcase, correct?
Yes.
So therefore this was not the way that it looked when you opened it up on the 20th?
Well, the top, what I consider the top is the pocket right up on the top. There's a little divider pocket. That's what I consider the top, and I cannot see that in this picture.
Okay, I'm asking about the magazines stacked in there. I think earlier you said you believed there was some loose papers on top of the stack of magazines.
Yes, but I consider the top being the closest to the top of the briefcase.
So you mean in the top pocket of the briefcase?
Yeah, I started up there with A and worked through.
Okay, do you recall what magazine was on the top of the stack of magazines in the briefcase?
No.
Alright, so you did not take this picture, did you? You don't know if you did or not.
No, I did not.
So you don't know when that was taken.
No.
Or what it represents, except it appears to be generally the same briefcase, right?
Yes.
Okay, do you know? Actually, let me just put that up one more time. This, barely legal, magazine that's on the top, do you know what number you gave that?
Not without looking at it back on my original photographs.
Can you do that easily?
There's a stack of photographs right there.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I believe there was 58 pieces of either magazines or evidence in 317, so I cannot remember the order.
Okay, is that, by the way, you looked at the materials in the briefcase?
Yes.
While you're looking, I'll ask you a question here. The materials in the briefcase are lawful to possess by an adult in California, is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Most of it's commercially available in one sense or another.
In one sense or another, I guess, yeah.
In other words, some you can buy at a newsstand. Others you might have to buy at a specialty store of some sort, but they're available, right?
Yes.
Were you able to find that? Yeah. Were you able to find the magazine that I asked about?
I believe so, if you can show me that original photograph.
Sure.
Do you mind if I put this back up? It's Exhibit 86.
You may.
Thank you. I'm showing you Exhibit 86. By the way, do you know who took this photograph?
I did.
Oh.
Oh, not that. I took this photograph. I didn't take that picture. I do not know who took that photograph.
Okay. For the record, when we say this and that, it later makes absolutely no sense if anybody wants to read it. So Exhibit 86 that we put up on the board that you're referring to, you do not know who took that photograph, correct?
No.
And I said, correct. Let me try it again. Do you who took Exhibit 86?
No, I do not.
And then you have in front of you a photograph.
And this is exhibit 644, and this is a photograph I took.
Okay, and you took that photograph?
And this is 317-0.
Okay, 317-0. So based on the lettering system that you had, if you started lettering from the pocket of the briefcase.
Yes.
Can you tell us whether or not that was on the top of the stack?
No.
Okay, so you either had, I don't know what letter of the alphabet O is, somebody will yell it out probably, but a through O.
A through, yeah.
Or a through N, and then it could or could not have been in the pocket, but they preceded your documenting that one. Okay, alright, I've removed 86, so we still have the timeline up there. And if the court wants the lights turned on for a moment, we can proceed and come back to this in a moment. Okay, now, the alternative light source that you used during that 1 week period from January 20th to January 26th was for the purpose of, was for the purpose of determining whether or not there was bodily fluids.
Or any trace evidence, hair, fibers.
And an alternative light source, can you describe that briefly?
Yes. What?
Let me stop you for a second. We've already had a little testimony. What color is it, and did you wear goggles, or was there a different color? What did you do?
Yes, it's basically a light source that goes through numerous wavelengths, mainly in the UV, and I wore orange goggles which narrows the band down and helps you see things fluoresce, or absorb the light, turn dark. And so basically I just went page by page, wearing those orange goggles, and using the UV light and examining each piece of paper.
Alright, is this destructive of the evidence to do that?
No. The CSS, the light source has dials on it, which dial each wavelength, and the CSS is the one that we use mainly for searching for body fluids, and that one is not, as far as I know, destructive to DNA evidence.
Okay, it's not destructive to the paper?
No.
Okay, so when you do an alternative light source examination of that sort, you can then do other tests on the materials.
Yes.
Freely thereafter, right?
It's harmless to the evidence that we looked at.
Alright, now, you are a latent print examiner, you told us?
Yes.
And that means that you have training and experience in examining fingerprints and then comparing them to known prints, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you examine these documents for fingerprints?
I did not examine. I looked for fingerprints, visible fingerprints, but until you. I did find one fingerprint on, I think it was you, or I can't remember. But it was just a partial print. I don't think it was comparable.
Okay, so with regard.
It was visible. A latent print is something that you can't see without processing.
I was just going to let you explain that. You have 3 kinds of prints that you find. One would be a visible print, where somebody sticks their finger into wet paint or blood or something, and it's just sitting there and you can see it with your eyeballs, right?
Yes.
And then you have a plastic print where somebody puts their print into clay, or, well, silly putty wouldn't last very long, would it? Or clay or putty of some sort, and it actually reflects the ridges in 3 dimensions, is that correct?
Yes.
And then you have the latent prints?
Yes.
And the latent print, you're likely to find more latent prints than you are the other 2 varieties, is that correct?
Most of the time, yes.
Okay, and in order to determine if there are latent prints, you can use various technologies to try to develop those prints, either using light sources or using chemical technology. Is that correct?
Yes.
Alright, now, you did not use any chemical technology in January of 2004 to attempt to find fingerprints on these documents?
No.
And did you use a RUVIS system or a scenescope system in January?
I used no, not a scenescope. I used their alternate light source that they provide us.
There's a company that makes scenescope. They've had different names, but it was CrimeScope at one time, right?
Yes.
And the official brand name, or whatever it is, of scenescope is their RUVIS system. Is that right?
Yes.
You are referring to something.
Yes. This is actually the manual to the scene. The ALS that I used.
Okay, and what was, now you've.
This is made by Jovan Ivan.
Okay. The court reporter is going to want to know how to spell that. You may as well spell it now, while you have a chance.
It's Jovinyvon, and the bottom name is Horiba.
May I approach, Your Honor, and look at that?
Yes.
Don't put it away until I look at it. I just want to get a quick look of what you referred to, if I may.
I need to have it back. That's the only one I have.
I'm not going to take it. Alright, having refreshed your recollection on that, that is the brand name for that particular alternative light source is the CrimeScope, right?
Yes.
And, in fact, that was a mini CrimeScope?
Yes.
Alright, so CrimeScope alternative light source. SceneScope is the special UV fingerprint scope, is that correct?
Yes.
Alright, so, you did not use the SceneScope in January of 2004?
No, I did not use the SceneScope, no.
When you were using the CrimeScope, after you used the CrimeScope, do you know if anybody had requested that you or another sheriff's department employee do a fingerprint examination on these documents?
Yes.
When did that occur?
It started in late spring, summer, 2004.
Alright.
I believe.
Okay.
Not by myself, so I'm not quite sure of the date.
Okay, can we put the light back on, if that's all right? And I have the blank form up here. It's exhibit. Were you aware that there was a grand jury proceeding in this case?
Yes.
Do you know roughly when that was?
April?
March and April of 2004.
Yeah.
Something like that? Could you mark on your chart there, in the general vicinity of March and April 2004, grand jury?
I'm marking, grand jury.
Alright, thank you. And do you know if Exhibit 317, let me withdraw that. Did you take possession of Exhibit 470, which is Sheriff's Item 317, at any time between January the 26th, 2004, and the time of the grand jury?
No.
Do you know if anybody else did?
Not offhand.
Alright, were you?
No.
Were you aware that Exhibit 470 and its contents was introduced into evidence at the grand jury?
Not personally.
Did you come to be aware of that later?
Yes.
Alright, so it's your best understanding right now that it was an exhibit in the grand jury, is that correct?
As far as I know, but I don't know personally.
Okay, now, when you got through on January the 26th of 2004 with your examination, other than the items that you took out, separated out, to take to the crime lab, the rest of the items were simply put back in the briefcase, correct?
Yes.
There was no individual packaging?
No.
There weren't, each item wasn't put in a plastic sleeve or anything like that.
No.
They were put in, much like we saw in Exhibit 86?
Yes.
After the grand jury, when did you next see Exhibit 470, Item 317, or its contents?
I was never assigned to do anything with 317 after I finished with it. I know it was processed for fingerprints later, late spring, August, by other people in my unit, but I had nothing to do with it at that point.
Okay, did you have anything to do with the fingerprint comparison?
Yes. And those were photographs.
You took photographs?
No, I examined photographs of latents.
I'm sorry, so you were presented with latent prints by way of photographs?
Yes.
And were they digital photographs or filmed?
Digital.
And was it your understanding, based on what you were asked to do, that you were presented with photographs that were taken with the assistance of the SceneScope?
Yes.
Did you have anything to do with the superglue fuming or ninhydrin process in developing this paper?
No, I was pregnant at the time and trying to avoid the chemicals.
Okay, that's a good idea. Okay, so your next involvement was then looking at photographs, and when was that? Do you recall that you were asked to look at the photographs of latent prints?
I started late summer, early fall examining photographs that were taken by other members of the forensics unit.
Did you have meetings with other members of the forensic team to discuss the photographs?
Yes.
Now, you say you're a latent print investigator by training and experience, is that correct?
Examiner, yes.
What did I say?
Investigator.
I meant, examiner, I'm sorry. LPE, latent print examiner. Do you have any certifications in that regard?
No, I have.
I'm going to object. It's beyond the scope, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Following the time that you looked at the photographs as a latent print examiner, did you have any other contact with Exhibit 470 or the contents, which would have been item 317?
No. Other than photographs, no.
Okay. Other than looking at photographs, you didn't take more photographs?
No.
May I have just one moment, Your Honor? Oh, by the way, the DNA. You said you sent some things off for DNA testing. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were aware that subjects that were being compared to anything that may or may not have been found, or anything that may have been found, included Gavin and Star Arvizo. Is that correct?
Yes.
Objection. Compound.
Sustained.
Were you aware that one of the subjects who was a subject to compare any substances found was Gavin Arvizo?
Objection. Lack of foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
When I sent these off to the lab, I believe my request was to be compared to the defendant.
Do you know if that original request was superseded?
I don't know.
So you're not aware of whether or not Gavin Arvizo's DNA was searched for in various items of evidence in this case?
No.
Same question pertaining to Star. Would I get the same answers?
Yes.
You're not aware of any matches that have been made to Gavin or Star Arvizo's DNA in this case, are you?
No, I do not.
Okay, thank you. Subject to recall on those issues that we can't go into now, I have no further questions at this time.
All right.
Excuse me. And I would move, 5006 I believe is up there. I'd move that in evidence, if I may, please.
It's admitted.
May I see it first, please, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
That was kind of a pig in a poke. I didn't look at it either. So maybe I should look at it.
It's too late. It's in evidence. Laughter.
To the witness. You could have been a doctor. May I project 5006, Your Honor?
Yes.
I can't write on that diagram, so I'll just ask you some questions about it. In between January 26, when you sealed up item 317, the briefcase.
Yes.
And the grand jury.
Yes.
Do you know where the evidence items were that you removed and had sent to the Department of Justice?
Calls for speculation.
She can answer that, yes, or no.
As far as I know, I left it.
Just, yes, or no. Do you know where they were?
Yes. Yes.
Were they in the briefcase?
No.
Do you know where they were?
They were sent to the Department of Justice lab in Goleta.
So as far as you know, exhibit number 518, which you've previously identified as being in the bag that went to the Department of Justice, as far as you know, that didn't go to the grand jury in that briefcase?
It was separated out from the briefcase, so it couldn't have gone in the briefcase.
Excuse me. I'd like to show you Penal Code section 313.1, and ask you to read it to yourself, subparagraph,
I'm sorry. Is this to refresh recollection? If it's not, it's improper.
It's improper to read in court?
That's such a good straight line. There's got to be an answer, but I don't have one, Your Honor. It's not proper to have the witness read something unless there's a foundation laid refreshing recollection. She's being asked to read a law book.
I've never heard that objection.
Have you read it?
Sort of.
Object. Irrelevant. Have you read it? It's got to be relevant to something. Refreshing recollection.
It will be, Your Honor. And if it's not, then the court won't let me ask the question, I'm certain.
The objection is overruled.
Okay.
Finished reading?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Sanger elicited from you the opinion that possessing the kind of material that you found in the briefcase is generally lawful. You gave him the opinion that you thought it was
lawful to own by an adult.
If that material were shown to a minor.
I believe.
Objection. Your Honor. Calls for a legal conclusion.
It's rebuttal to your question, counsel.
It would be illegal.
You may answer.
It would be illegal to the minor.
And that's Penal Code section
313.1.
When you participated in the fingerprint work in this case later on in 2004, were you the partner of anybody in particular?
Yes. I was partnered up with a retired sergeant, Bob Spinner.
And is he the person tasked with making the analysis of the fingerprint comparisons in this case?
Yes. He was the initial and I was the verifier.
And is that a standard protocol?
Yes. We used, every time we've made a fingerprint, we always have two people examine it independently. That way we hopefully won't make a mistake.
To your knowledge, were the fingerprints of any minors recovered from item 317R?
I'll need to check a list.
I'm going to object that there's a lack of foundation at this point.
Yes.
Just a moment.
I'm going to withdraw the objection, Your Honor.
All right.
Yes, there were some.
Okay. It's a yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Well, first of all, before we get into the last area, the identification of the fingerprints, and I think we can turn off the screen if the district attorney asked you to read a section out of the penal code, I guess. Is that what he did?
Yes.
All right, and you would agree that you're not a lawyer, right?
Yes.
And you could be, actually. I shouldn't have put it that way. But you aren't, it turns out.
I'm not a lawyer.
Okay. And you're not offering an opinion as to what Mr. Jackson is charged with in this case, are you?
No.
And as far as you know, he is not charged with the code section that you were asked to look at?
As far as I know, no.
Okay. And in fact, the kind of material that if adults possess it, that's all I asked was if adults possessed that kind of material. There's nothing illegal about simply possessing that kind of material, true?
True.
Okay. Now, going back to your fingerprint testimony, I would like to ask you some questions, then, about your experience and training in fingerprints. So are you certified by any organization? I think you told us that you are, by training and experience, a latent print examiner.
I am trained in, with experience, a latent print examiner.
So are you certified by anybody or any association as a latent print examiner or anything else in that category?
No.
Are there bodies that certify people as latent print examiners?
Yes.
And what bodies are those, for instance?
International Association of Identification I'm a member of, but I have not taken the test through them. It's not a requirement of our department.
Okay. Are you familiar with SWGFST? SWGFST?
Yes.
And what's that?
Scientific Working Group. It's a fingerprint group.
Okay.
That sets basically the guiding rules of fingerprint examiners.
Sets forth the standards for.
The standards.
Right. And are there any other groups that you're aware of that are specifically oriented towards fingerprint examiners?
Yes. There's SCAFO, which is Southern California Association of Fingerprint Officers. There's numerous, IAI State Division. There's the California Division of IAI. IAI is International Association of Identification, but they have little subgroups, and then in any major city you find smaller groups.
So people, latent print examiners, kind of get together and they have seminars from time to time?
Yes.
Talk about what they're doing. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you're not certified by any of those organizations or licensed, is that correct?
No, but I do go to their meetings.
Okay. Now, in that regard, there are 3 aspects to latent print examination. Is that right? Let me back up before we get to that. There are three principles to the underlying concept of latent print comparison. Is that right?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope.
Overruled.
As far as.
Well, let me suggest, the reason that you examine latent prints and compare them to what's called a known print.
Yes.
Is to try to make a determination, the best you can, as to whether or not the same person gave the latent print who gave the rolled print, right?
Yes.
And generally when you have a rolled print, that means you had somebody there with a law enforcement officer rolling their prints.
Yes.
Okay. And so there's some form of identification, often a picture, right?
Yes.
So that way, you want to be pretty sure that the rolled prints belong to the person that.
Yes. There's the demographical information attached to the card.
So that's rolled prints. Now, the latent prints are the ones that randomly show up in evidence that you're asked to inspect. Is that correct?
Yes.
And those prints may be partial prints. Is that correct?
It can be partial. They mainly are partial.
That's what I was going to say. You don't. What you call a 10 print. Whereas you have somebody who's got 10 fingers, they do the whole.
Yeah, you roll from nail to nail. And usually you don't go and pick up pieces of paper and items going like this, indicating. You touch it, and that way you get a partial print.
And sometimes partial prints are obscured by imperfections in the surface, is that right?
Yes.
And sometimes partial prints are obscured because somebody has smeared the print?
Yes.
Alright, now, the basic principles I was getting at are that. Number 1, fingerprints are more or less permanent for an individual. Is that correct?
Yes. They start at 12 weeks in the womb and they're the same until you die.
Alright, now, there are some ways for fingerprints to actually change during the course of somebody's life. Is that correct?
Change. You add things to it, like scars, marks, warts can alter, but they're not altering the fingerprint. They're adding to the.
Alright, it's a matter of semantics, I suppose. But the ridge lines, when you're talking about fingerprints, those are sometimes what are called friction ridges. Is that correct?
Yes.
And those are the ridges. When you look at the pictures on the screen there, you'll see that they go. It's not there. We have seen the picture up there. You might see hoops or whorls.
Loops, whorls or arches.
I'm sorry. Loops, whorls or arches. I said, hoops. Alright, loops, whorls, or arches. Those are the 3 main configurations of prints?
Yes.
And then you're going to see a lot of individual characteristics. Is that correct?
Yes, which we call minutia.
So, for instance, something like 65% of the population have whorls. Is that right?
No, loops.
Loops. Okay. 35% whorls. See if I get that right.
Yes. Approximate. In that area.
But large parts of the population have loops or whorls, so that isn't going to get you too far, right, in making an actual comparison?
No. That's your initial pattern of recognition.
And then to get to a better comfort level to say that you have some kind of identification, you need to look at the minutia, which are the very small individual characteristics. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, those small individual characteristics can change, as you indicated, based on scarring or warts or some other kind of deformity over a period of time.
They don't change. They're more, the scar is actually added into the original pattern.
Alright, but one of the basic premises is that if somebody has fingerprints at some point in their life, that's pretty much going to be their fingerprints.
For the rest of their life.
Okay, now, the next principle that's involved in doing an examination and a comparison is that fingerprints are pretty much unique to an individual?
Yes.
Now, that proposition is somewhat controversial, is it not?
Yes.
Okay, we had a recent example with the Madrid bombing case, is that correct?
Yes.
You're familiar with that?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury just briefly what that's about?
Objection. Relevance.
Sustained.
Okay, without going into the details, I don't want to run afoul of the court's ruling, but without going into the details, can I ask you this? Was there a lawyer in Oregon who was accused of being involved in a terrorist bombing in Madrid based on a fingerprint?
Objection. What is the relevance of that?
Validation studies. I won't say any more.
Can you approach that issue without raising another case?
Let me go back and see if I can. If I can go back and see if we get to this point or not. Let's do it this way.
Thank you.
Within the last 10 years or so, there has been writings raising the question of whether or not there's sufficient differentiation between any two given fingerprints in the world to make positive identifications. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'm going to object as compound, Judge.
Overruled.
And there has been, among other things, some litigation in various courts around the country regarding what we might call validation, validating that prints are unique enough to make positive identifications?
Yes.
And you're aware of Judge Pollack's decision in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania?
Objection. Relevance. Lack of foundation.
Overruled. You can answer that, yes, or no.
Yes, I know of it.
Okay, and without going into detail, Judge Pollack raised serious questions about the validity of fingerprint examination and its admissibility in court, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
In response to Judge Pollack's decisions, have there been increasing efforts on the part of the fingerprint examining community to validate their techniques?
Yes.
All right, and that brings us to the Madrid bombing case, which I'd just like to ask briefly about, if I may.
I'm going to make the same objection, Your Honor. I don't know how that's relevant.
Well, I think I have to let you ask the question before I know whether I'll let you ask the question.
Okay, laughter. Okay, I'll try to do it as simply as I can, or as summarily as possible, so we don't get into too much detail. You're aware that a number of fingerprint examiners that were doing the Madrid bombing case had made a positive identification of the fingerprint of a lawyer in Oregon. Are you aware of that?
Objection. Relevance.
You may answer that, yes, or no.
Yes.
And in that particular case, the experts found in excess of 16 points of identification when they made that, what turned out to be a false positive identification, correct?
I don't.
Assumes facts not in evidence, Your Honor.
You were going to say, I don't know, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll allow the answer and the question.
Now, as a result of that particular case, has there been even more intensification of the efforts on the part of the fingerprint examining community to validate their techniques?
Objection. That calls for speculation, lack of foundation.
Sustained. Foundation.
Okay, are you aware? You participate in these various organizations. Are you aware? Let's just make it real simple. The Madrid bombing case and the false identification in that case of the fingerprint.
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is assuming facts not in evidence. He's testifying.
Well, was there a false identification of a fingerprint in the Madrid bombing case?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
Overruled.
Yes. Yes.
All right, and as a result of that false identification, do you know when that was, by the way, when that occurred?
Last year.
Okay, sometime in 2004, right?
Yes.
As a result of that incident, in addition to all the others, has there been additional concern in the fingerprint examination and comparison community that you are involved in, to your personal knowledge?
Objection, Your Honor. The question is compound. It inserts facts not in evidence, and it lacks foundation.
I think there's a more basic question you have to ask her before you can ask that, which is a foundational question.
All right. Has that case been discussed amongst fingerprint examiners in your presence?
Yes.
Has it been discussed at seminars? Have you been to a seminar since that case came down?
Yes, I've been to a seminar. It wasn't discussed directly, but it was referred to.
And it was a topic of conversation at the coffee machine at the break?
Don't drink coffee.
Okay, that's right. Okay, you're taking a very healthy approach. All right, in any event. And then do you read periodicals and other literature regarding fingerprint examination?
Yes.
And has that case been the subject of significant discussion in the periodicals relating to fingerprint examination?
Yes. And I haven't quite finished reading that one article.
Okay, as a result of these concerns, has there been an increased effort to, let me withdraw that. As a result, let me withdraw that. What are validation studies?
Objection. Lack of foundation, Your Honor.
Overruled. You may answer.
They're tests for competency.
Has there been an effort to enhance the validation studies in order to prove the proficiency of fingerprint examiners?
I don't know of any official ones, but we always try to be perfectionists.
Alright, now, in the areas, I'm trying to think of a 1-minute question, so I don't launch into something.
That's kind of you.
But in the area of fingerprint examination, there's a fellow by the name of Galton who really pioneered all of this in the 1880s, is that correct?
Yes.
And to this day, there's a reference to Galton when you talk about Galton points, is that correct?
Galton's details, and that's basically minutia, which are points of reference.
So you look at points. Galton looked at points of reference which would be actual details of the ridgelines in the fingerprint, is that correct?
Yes.
Alright.
All right, we'll.
Being so bold as to take 20 seconds extra here.